beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. Within this video I'll be giving the Saison Farmhouse beer style my full guide treatment. In my usual style guide format, I will begin with a little history before then moving on to BJCP notes for competition, and then I'll move on to a recipe writing guide. I will then share 3 of my own tried and tested recipes according to ABV of this style with recent brew day footage of one of them. I will then show you the finished beer and give you some tasting notes and impressions. So let's get started with a little history. The Saison beer style is based on Belgian farmhouse beers that were brewed during the winter months and then conditioned in cellars until they were consumed by seasonal farm workers during the summer. The word Saison translates to season in English, so you can see the connection. These beers were an area of pride for many farm owners who used their own range of special ingredients that were based on what was available to them. Naturally, this tradition of farmhouse brewing was not just a Belgian speciality. Farmhouse brewing was a popular tradition across Europe, and there is still much of it going on today. Let's now move on to the BJCP's impression of this beer style for competition, which I will condense for key information. Do note that this is simply relevant for competition under the BJCP. The Saison beer style in reality is one of the most open ones due to its history, but naturally the BJCP need to have some guidelines to narrow things down for competition. You will indeed find commercial brewery examples of this style that go against these guidelines, so keep this in mind for your own brews. Aroma. Quite aromatic with fruity, spicy and hoppy characteristics. Fruit is usually citrus, the hops being low to moderate with spicy, floral, earthy notes. Spice is peppery rather than clove. Stronger versions will have more noticeable malt aroma. Appearance. A variety of colour options, long-lasting head, clarity can vary. Flavour. Medium low to medium high fruity and spicy flavours supported by low to medium soft malt character. Moderate to high bitterness though can be sour. A dry finish is expected with pepper spice in the background. Mouthfeel. Light to medium body, low alcohol warming, very high carbonation. Overall impression, a varying beer style that is refreshing, highly carbonated and flavourful that finishes very dry. A wide range of scope here for sure. Shared at the bottom of the screen now is the BJCP vital statistics, which were based on the standard version only. It should be understood that this style has 3 classifications, table, standard and strong. I have also now added in the all-important BUGU for this style, again for the standard version only, and it should be understood that this is the average. This screen is now complete and ready for a screenshot if that is your thing. Let us now look at recipe writing to this style with my guidelines. Pale Ale or Pilsner malt are the usual choices of base malt here, and certainly sometimes both can be used for varying effects. Pale Ale will certainly give you more flavour and Pilsner malt will promote more crispness. The percentage to allow here is quite variable, but the 65% plus shown is pretty average. Both Munich and Vienna are good choices for this style and are usually at between 10 to 25% of your grist. Vienna is characteristically offering its grainy-like quality that is also malty and quite sweet. However, Munich has a stronger and sweeter malty flavour that is not so grainy. It would be unusual to use both in the same grain bill. Both of these malts also have Cara versions which can be used for extra character, colour and sweetness. It is very common to see some wheat malt in the Saison, but I would suggest staying between 1 to 20% to keep this to style. I personally prefer small amounts here in the 1 to 5% range, which will add in body and head retention rather than that full wheat flavour. There are different versions of wheat malt to play with here that can offer some very nice variations. I have a guide to wheat on my channel which offers some very good details on this with further explanation as shown on screen now. As this is a Belgian style, sugars are also commonplace in the style, and I would recommend using them at up to 20% of the fermentables. Quite often you will see that these are used at lower percentage ratios in this style compared to others. The role of sugar is to lower body and aid in drinkability, but it can also be used for adding in colour. This sugar can be introduced in various different forms like syrup or candy sugar, but sugar-rich sauces can also be used like honey, for example, which contains 3 different types of sugar. Honey is almost 100% fermentable and can bring in flavour if used during fermentation. Sugar types that are inverted, that are in rock or syrup form, will lend in some extra sweetness that your yeast will not be able to ferment completely. I would suggest that you avoid these types if you are entering BJCP competition. In this case I would suggest regular table sugar, and this will lead to the desirable dryness as it is fully fermentable. To my mind this is a shame, because I actually prefer Saison examples that are less dry, and it seems to me that a good percentage of commercial Saisons are far from bone dry either. Next we have our friend crystal malt, which features in most recipes. Within this style, crystal malt is either typically not used or used in very small amounts, mostly to aid in colour if larger amounts of wheat are used. In the case of small amounts of wheat, then lower colour crystal is used to aid in head retention and body. Let's now look at speciality grain. There are many types of speciality grain that can be added to this style to add in extra flavours. Good solid choices are those from Belgian selections like Special B, Abbey and Aromatic, but there are many more that you can find via Belgian maltsters like Castle Maltings. For this style I suggest sticking with either one or two of these at the most to keep the effect subtle, and for this style less can certainly be better than more, hence my suggestion being in the 1 to 5% range. As some final notes on grain bill and fermentables in general, there are many ways to go about recipe writing a Saison, simply due to how wide open the style is. Quite often homebrewers will go with a very basic 3 to 4 malt design, and this certainly works, but this style can be certainly an awful lot more, as craft breweries have more than demonstrated in recent years with the use of less conventional malts along with fruit and sour cultures. I would also suggest that you do not limit yourself to blonde examples either, as there is a fairly wide range of colour available within this style. Let's now move on to hops. This style, like all Belgian styles, is malt and yeast forward, but you will need to balance its alcohol with hops at the very least, but it is common to add in a little hop flavour too. Common addition times are at the start of the boil for bittering and at 15 minutes till the end of the boil for flavouring. Popular hop types are now listed on screen. You will note that they are very much European hops, with Saaz being a personal favourite of mine. Moving on to yeast, there are a lot of great choices. A selection of my favourites are shown on screen in the form of dry and liquid yeast. Typically Saison yeast will offer a high attenuation along with fruity, earthy and spicy flavours. Belle Saison is known for its very high reliability and more muted flavours compared to some other choices. Sapphire BE134 has some extra flavours going on that are certainly more pronounced, but of course this will not suit everyone. In terms of liquid yeast, White Labs 565 has its fans based on its slightly sweet finish, along with its peppery, earthy and spicy flavours. On the downside, it is known for being a little slow in starting and finishing, and often needs a helping hand. Yeast 3711 French Saison yeast offers a great deal more reliability, and offers big fruitiness along with black pepper-like spice. Many find this to be a little too much at higher fermentation temperatures. In terms of kveik, I certainly recommend Vos kveik as an ideal co-fermentation strain, especially if you are going with a high ABV Saison, as it will greatly shorten the conditioning phase. More on this later. Let's now move on to water profiles, which is quite tricky for this style, as there really is no typical water profile due to its variation. However, authentic Belgian water profiles within known breweries tend to be on the hard side. Many of these breweries are also known to use water straight without any adjustments. Shown here are a couple of classic examples. Westmaler profile being the typical hard profile and the Chimay profile at the bottom being much softer than most to give a nice alternative. When using this profile you will need to adjust pH though. Before moving on to my tried and tested brew, this style needs a little further explanation. Due to the variations of this style available, it is classified into 3 different types according to alcohol strength. Shown on screen are these variations. Personally, I decided to brew the standard variety. Within this video's description I will share this recipe in full as usual, along with a Brewfather link, but due to text limitations within the YouTube description I will only be able to share Brewfather links for each of them. Let's get on with the brew. We will now look at my standard Saison tried and tested recipe along with recent brew day footage where I used the Brewzilla 65 litre brewing system. As already mentioned, I am sharing this recipe in full in this video's description, and this also includes both metric and imperial measurements, as well as a link to the recipe on Brewfather, which is free to use with some limitations. To convert this recipe to your brewing system on Brewfather, simply change the equipment section and scale it to the volume desired. You should then replace my ingredients with your own and ensure the values for IBU and gravity match that for the original. This is easily done by using the recipe in the video's description for reference. Let's now get this mash started and look at the mash schedule for this recipe. Like many of the Belgian styles, this mash has multiple steps and mash out. It begins in the low mash temperature range and progresses into the upper range for extra special complexity and higher fermentables compared to a cookie cutter one-step mash plus mash out. Moving on now onto the vitals and fermentables for this recipe, which are now shown on the left-hand side of the screen. You will note that we have a relatively high ABV despite the relatively low OG. This is because of the use of yeast with a high attenuation rate, which is typical for this style and other Belgian styles too, and revealed in the low FG. I have balanced this to the level of 0.47 BUGU, which I believe is a nice sweet spot for Saisons in general, and I use the same level of balance for the table and super versions of Saison also. You will note that the fermentables list is quite lengthy for this recipe. This recipe has been in evolution over many years now, and when I make changes to it, I do this just to give it a different twist, rather than an aim for improvement. The Pale Ale and Munich here makes for a very nice blend for the base of this recipe, the Munich adding a nice level of malty qualities. The honey shown here is added during fermentation, so I will cover this in detail later. I also have some Caramunich here, which adds in some extra malty character along with some extra sweetness, which I personally value in this style. It also helps form this a very nice colour that you can see here. But naturally you'll need to wait to see the final colour of this during the tasting at the end of this video. The Carapils, which is a low-level crystal malt, gives this recipe some background sweet notes of caramel, plus some head retention and body, but I'm also using wheat in a minimum form to add to these qualities further. You'll also note the use of two different candy sugars. Both of these will add in unfermentable sugars to ensure that this does not taste too dry, which is something I'm always aimed to avoid in this style. If you want to have this extra dry effect, then use candy sugar that states that it is 100% fermentable. It is available when it's refined from sugar beets. Both of these sugars will also lower body, which in combination with the Carapils and wheat will have some balancing going on, but in this recipe it does favour drinkability as an end effect. The dark candy sugar will also add in some subtle dark caramel notes, which furthers the complexity of this end beer. Lastly, we have Special B, which is my favourite Belgian speciality grain. At this level it will add in some very nice subtle notes of dark fruit, which are mostly dark cherry and plum, which raise the complexity of this recipe very nicely. I then sparged by hand to ensure that my efficiency numbers were on point. I then set the system to boil and did a quick colour check. One thing you will notice is that often wort looks darker, especially at higher volumes, as you can see here. A simple jug test like this one can certainly be very reassuring. Here we are now at early boil, and I am clearing the protein on top so that it drops. This will also safeguard against a boil over. On the right hand side of the screen is a boil summary. As my regular viewers will know, I highly regard Saaz hops and use them for the two additions in this recipe. The first 60-minute addition will produce a delicate bitterness to balance this beer nicely, and the flame out addition will bring in the mild earthy herbal spicy flavours and aromas that Saaz is so well known for. In the middle of these boil additions you will note a 5-minute addition with extra flavourings. If you enjoy a more muted flavour from coriander, then add this uncrushed, using the weights in my recipe, but if you want more then crush it before adding. In addition to this, you will see in my recipe I'm using sweet and bitter orange peel. These are available within some homebrew stores. If you cannot obtain these, then I suggest you combine the weights of these two together and create your own orange peel addition from what you can find. After the boil, I then chilled this wort using the Brewfather Cultivar chiller straight into my foeder. This foeder is crafted from American white oak and is ideal for adding even more complexity to many different beer styles. At this point I have two videos as part of a new series that provide complete information on step-by-step foeder use in a number of different areas. So if you're looking for more foeder information, including why these are great for homebrewers, then check out this series on my channel. As you can see on screen, I used two different types of yeast for this fermentation, both of which were pitched at the same time. This particular batch brewed was 45 litre, and this combination of Belle Saison and Vos Kveik worked out very nicely, with just 2 sachets of each needed for this volume. The fermentation schedule for this one is very simple, and it is now shown on screen. These two yeast types should be pitched together as a co-fermentation to enjoy the following effects. Very high reliability when complemented with yeast nutrient for the Kveik. I suggest a triple serving. Flavour contribution will be spicy with some red apple and clove, along with citrus and banana in the background. Due to the Kveik, this will condition into a prime state very quickly, and the same goes for the table and super versions of this recipe also that I'm providing. If you are new to co-fermentation, then check out these two videos on my channel for further information and I hope inspiration. Once you notice that fermentation is starting to calm, then it is time to take the next step. Start off by adding a runny honey into your pan on your stove. At about 500 milliliters of water, you can subtract this from your sparge volume during the brew to keep the recipe calculations on point. Using a whisk and a relatively low heat, stir this until all of the sugar has been dissolved. Once this is done, then you can either leave it for some hours to cool down naturally, or find an alternative method of cooling, like adding it to your sink with cold water, or as I clearly did, leave it outside in the snow for a short while. Because I am adding this to a fooder, I used this stainless steel funnel, which was cleaned and sanitized before use. If you are using a regular fermenter, then you can simply pour it in. Because you are adding this in during fermentation, there is no splashing to be concerned about at all. Once this is all added and you have closed your fermenter back up, then you will notice a flurry of activity pretty fast, which is your yeast telling you that it appreciated the extra snack. The honey is added at this point because it will allow the honey flavour to sing much more brightly than any other method. During the process of this beer's life in my fooder, I was taking weekly samples after fermentation. Once the desired oak effect was reached, it was then transferred into a keg directly from my fooder. Here is a close-up look at the naked pour from the keg, and here is a look at the same pour into a glass. This beer has not been kegged for long, and I have done nothing to aid in its clarity. I have not fast carbed this either, and the carbonation level you see here is less than this will end up with. Certainly, given some more time, this will evolve further in various ways. Here are my tasting notes at this fairly early point. Let's start with aroma. My nose detects honey notes along with a little fruit and caramel. There is a little oak in there also, but it is very much in the background. Flavour-wise, there is already complexity developing here, and this is very encouraging. We can thank the Kveik yeast for this, but with past brews of this same recipe, this generally takes about 2 months to develop fully, and those brews were not subject to oak, so this is going to be especially interesting. On taste entry, there is a malty honey flavour that finishes with a smooth level of bitterness. There is also a nice level of citrus on the finish. In the background there is this light oak presence that intermingles with the occasional hints of dark fruit. This experience changes as you get further down the glass. Here are some notes. As this beer continues further, I expect the flavours to become more crisp and cleaner. Not that this tastes unclean, it just needs a little more time to develop, but it is already very drinkable. It would just be nicer to have it in its fully conditioned state. I personally feel that this middle strength version pleases me more overall compared to the strong and table versions. My overall impression is that this is a well-balanced beer. The flavours here neither come across as sweet nor very dry. This is nicely in the middle, which is how I personally prefer this style. This beer has high drinkability even at this stage, and is certainly very thirst-quenching. If you are looking for a nice summer beer with a good level of complexity that will evolve with a little time, then this is going to be ideal. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support, you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel, then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!